Hi, so this video is a word for instrumentalists about practice and about my favourite technical exercise, scales. So practice is really important, and here's the hard message, serious face. If you don't practice, you will never get better. And do you know what? It's worse than that, because if you don't practice, you'll actually get worse. And that's really hard. Because we have lots of things to do in our lives, and there's things. There's Netflix, there's lots of stuff. There's your friends. There's all of that stuff. But you'll never get better if you don't. You'll just get worse. And what's the point of that? So practice. First thing I want you to think about is when and how often you're going to practice. So ideally, you do an hour a day. Most of us haven't got time for that. But think about how long it will take for you to work through all the things you need to work through, and we'll talk about them in a moment, and how many days of that you need in order to get better. And if you've got a lesson one week and a lesson the next week, how much you need to do the work that I've asked you to do in that week or in that fortnight. Next thing is, where do you practice? Now, for instrumentalists particularly, this is quite tricky. For singers, it's a little bit easier, I think. But with the volume of some of our instruments, particularly saxophonists, we have to think about where and when. So for me, I'm very lucky. I have this beautiful music room that I can practice in. But if you're practicing in your bedroom, for example, you might need to negotiate with someone who you share with about when you use that. You might have to think about who else is in the house that you don't want to keep awake with your very loud saxophone practice. But plan it. I like to put it in my diary, because if I put things in my diary, and that's electronic on my phone, then it happens. So once you sit down to practice, some key things about how to practice your instrument. First is get yourself physically ready, give yourself a bit of a shake and a stretch maybe, do some breathing exercises. There's lots of those in my singing videos, and you can have a look at those, and they'll be on playlists all over my YouTube channel. So once you've done some stretching and some breathing, do some long notes. So grab your instrument, play some beautiful long notes. That's working on your breathing again, it's working on your tone, and it's warming up your instrument. Next thing, scales. We'll come back to scales in a moment. After that, you're ready to look at the pieces that you're working on. But first, I want you to pick the hardest bits. The bits that maybe we've put a little star around, the bits every time you play it go a little bit. You need to practice those bits separately. One reason is, if you keep just skimming over them, you're going to get brilliant at the mistakes you're making. And actually, you practice the mistakes. You just get better and better at making the mistake, and then it's harder and harder to correct it. So what you're going to do is take a bar at a time, or even a little set of notes at a time, and take back control of that section. Don't like the connotations of that phrase anymore, but you're going to do it with your music. So a little phrase with maybe 4 notes that's really tricky, your fingers can't quite work around it, or you're not sure what's going on with tone or breathing or whatever. Play it really slowly until it is absolutely beautiful, and then very slowly speed it up. Very, very slowly speed it up. Once you've got that little phrase to a state where you can play it 10 times in a row without mistakes, you're ready to move on. Now, that might stretch over a whole load of practice sessions. It might take you a while to get to that stage, but that's the aim with little sections. Once you've done that, you might want to work on the hardest piece, so the one you like the least. And I've talked in my singing video, same kind of thing about practice, about thinking about this like a meal. I always eat the vegetables first, because I love vegetables, but they're not my favourite bit. I always want to end my meal with my favourite bit. So I'll eat the chips last, or the mashed potato last, or whatever it is, the good stuff last. So once you've done the hard stuff in bite size, the hard stuff in terms of the pieces, then move on to the fun stuff. Move on to the pieces that you're really enjoying, and play some stuff that isn't stuff we've been working on. Play music from Harry Potter, or by your favourite artist, whoever it is. But get that stuff done last. So, scales. For a long time, I thought about scales as being something that you did for an exam, and I hated them, and I was a bit rubbish at them. But when I started playing music by composers like Bach and Handel, and Telemann and Mozart, who are my favourite composers to play on the flute, which is my main instrument, I realised that actually scales are really important. And here are some of the reasons that they're important. So, number one, they're good at getting your fingers around different keys and getting you used to working in that key. They're really good if you're learning new notes. So as you learn the flute, you get really high. It's really good for practicing those notes and just getting your fingers working in that particular key. So if you've got a song, a piece to play that's in the key of D major, 2 sharps, play D major before you start. Play the arpeggio too, but play the scale. They're good for breathing, because in your scales you want to breathe in the right place. You don't want to play da 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 da. It's not good. You want to breathe at the octave point. So good for practicing your breathing. If you're having particular trouble in a piece with the articulation, so how the tonguing works, try doing your scales in that same articulation. So you don't just want to go da 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 da. You want to go da 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 da, something like that. I always think that scales should be beautiful. They shouldn't just be some notes. And that's what makes them great at practice. So if you imagine that one day it's the Royal Albert Hall and ladies and gentlemen, here is Carolyn playing D major. I want to play it well. I also play my scales into a mirror because, you see when I did that then? That's not good, is it? I notice when I play in a mirror that I need to sort that out. So make sure that you're holding your instrument well, that you're sitting well or you're standing well. You can do that really well in a mirror. And your scales are an easy way of watching that because you're not having to look at music. They might be a good way of looking at phrasing or dynamics. You can play them quietly or loud and then quiet, or quiet and then loud, which is the better way around. And then finally, they're really good for sight reading. So what I said about Bach and Mozart and all of those people, I can play a lot of their music because I can just look at it and go, oh, well, that bit there's a D major scale, or that's just a chromatic scale, or that's an arpeggio of whatever key. And then my brain takes over and I don't have to read those individual notes. I just read a section. So those are all the reasons you should play your scales. They're brilliant. Enjoy them. Have some fun with them, but get good at them because they will help you and they will make you a better player. So enjoy your practice. Drop me a line if you've got questions or comments, and I'll see you again soon.